What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Watching the Meta, the weekly series where you watch me, watch the people who are playing, who are watching, the people who are watching, the people who are playing, that are watching, the people watching the metagame, something like that. We're going to take a look at the Modern, Pioneer, and Standard format challenges over the weekend on Magic: The Gathering Online. We're going to take a look and see what the metagame looks like. We're going to see what maybe differences in terms of metagame share from last week to this week. Take a look and see what won the various challenges. And then at the very end of each segment, we are going to take a look and see if we can find some spicy deck lists littered across the top 32. And we are going to kick things off, as we always do, with Modern. And I've been saying this for the past, 2-3 months at this point. I think Modern is probably the healthiest of the competitive formats. I don't know if you would necessarily consider Pioneer as a competitive format per se, but I mean, I have hopes. Maybe it'll come back one day. But we're going to look at Modern here, and as you can see, 8 challenges won by 8 different decks. Amulet Titan, Azorius Control, Broodscale, Esper Blink, Grixis Reanimator, Izzet Prowess, Belcher, and Neobrand. There were showcase qualifiers, I think is what they're labeled as. Basically, the smaller, more exclusive 32-person events that you have to qualify for. You have to top 8, like a 300-person showcase challenge, and then there's a 32-person showcase qualifier. The winner of that gets a PT invite and a Mox invite. That event was won by Neobrand. I believe it was actually Yuki Chikawa, so congratulations. And Neobrand took down that event. Now, as far as the metagame is concerned, again, there's a bit of a small uptick in Boros. We've seen this happen over the past couple of weeks. 2 weeks ago, it was hovering between 11 and 12. Last week, it was up to 14.7. Now it's back up to 16.8. Still nothing alarming in terms of there's like a 5-alarm fire. It's not like VV Cauldron numbers or anything. We'll get to that later. But yeah, it looks good. It looks pretty healthy. Boros Energy is, a pretty interactive deck. I think I enjoy the games playing against Boros. Some of them can feel a little monotonous, but there's a lot of back and forth sometimes. Affinity down from 8% to 3.1%, so a pretty huge decrease in affinity, more than half. But I think that kind of makes sense, right? As Affinity is one of those decks where, as it starts to rise in popularity, there's a plethora of unbelievable sideboard against it. Clarion Conqueror, Stony Silence, Force of Vigor, there's just an endless number of Meltdown cards that you can play against Affinity. So if Affinity's stock is rising, you add more of those cards to your sideboard, and then Affinity does worse that week. So sort of makes sense there, natural progression. Domain Zoo, Esper Blink, roughly about the same. Azorius Control took a bit of a dip from 6.3 to 2%. And I think part of that is due to Eldrazi-tron. Look at that, from 5.4, almost doubled to 9.4. And I think part of that is the increase in Esper Blink. Here from 7, it looks like it's been decreasing, but if you add Esper Blink and Orzhov Blink, then those white Blink archetypes are roughly about 10%, so that would actually be second place. And Eldrazi-tron is sort of meant to prey upon those decks. The Blink decks are trying to play a bit of a longer game. Eldrazi-tron is just kind of doing its own thing. Very hard to interact with for decks like that. Grixis Reanimator, Ruby Storm, roughly about the same. I want to highlight Broodscale Combo from 3.1 to 6.6. Orzhov Blink from 1.8 to 5.1. So it seems like some of the Esper players maybe switch back to Orzhov. Dimir Murktide, 3.1 this week, 1.3 last week. Izzet Prowess, basically non-existent to 5.1%. And then Neobrand, the same thing, basically non-existent from 4.3. So Neobrand, Prowess, and Broodscale have had some pretty sizable upticks, and I think all 3 of those, maybe not Prowess, but Neobrand and Broodscale seem like they're pretty good against Boros. So if you're looking for something that's good against Boros, maybe want to look towards one of those combo decks that Boros has a hard time interacting with game 1. But that's the metagame. Now, we're going to take a look and see if we can find some spicy deck lists in these top 32s. And we are going to kick things off with Duke 12 in 18th place. This is Esper Goryo's Vengeance, a deck that is utilizing this card that you see on your screen, Goryo's Vengeance, to return legendary creatures from your graveyard to the battlefield, sort of do like a one-shot where you can get Atraxa back into play, or Gristlebrand. Both of these will draw you a bunch of cards. And the really cool thing about Goryo's Vengeance is this has this line of text that says, the creature gains haste, but the downside is you exile it at the beginning of the next end step. But if you can ephemerate the creature that you Goryo's Vengeance, it will relieve the battlefield, come back, and then it will no longer be under that exile at the beginning of the next end step clause. So we've seen Esper Goryo's decks before. A lot of these cards you may be familiar with, like interaction like Thoughtseize and Prismatic Ending, ways to discard like Tainted Indulgence, Faithful Mending, Psychic Frog, the Reanimations angle, which is Goryo's Vengeance, and Emperor of Bones. The reason I wanted to highlight this, as you can see towards the top, these decks are starting to adopt Quantum Riddler, which makes a lot of sense to me. This deck already wanted to play Ephemerate because of the Goryo's Vengeance angle, like resetting your big creature, and it's also a 4 Solitude deck. So if you're already a deck that is playing blue cards and Ephemerate, and it just sort of makes sense as a natural progression to put Riddler in your deck to have it be better in those fair games. The one thing that I really want to highlight here is something that maybe is not apparent at first glance. Quantum Riddler goes kind of crazy with Psychic Frog because you can dump your, so say you warp a Riddler with a frog in play. You can dump your hand, maybe leave one card, hit with the frog, and then the frog trigger will draw 2 because you're now sort of at that 1 or less threshold for the Riddler. So really nice interaction there. Super clean looking list. We could take a look at the sideboard real quick just for posterity's sake. Apparently the sideboard has 8 consigned memories. That might be a little bit of a bug. Okay, I think the sideboard might be doubled up, but you get the gist of it. Don't play 8 consigned memories, but sweet looking deck list here from Duke 12, Esper Goryos. Next up here from S Pyromancer in 4th place, so a nice little top 8 here. This is 4-color Omnath, but it's a little bit more than 4-color Omnath. So we have the aforementioned Omnath Locus of Creation, extremely powerful card, extremely banned card when it was legal in it was legal in Standard for not that long. It did get banned in Standard. The powerful card that we are allowed to play in the Modern format. And the sort of the idea when you're playing an Omnath deck is you just want to play good interaction and a whole mess of card advantage, just a pile of card advantage. So you see you have the Solitude, just as sort of like a good removal spell. But the really important thing here is Birthing Ritual. So Birthing Ritual allows you to sort of similar to like a birthing pod, but it's only a once per turn. So end step, you can look at the top 7. You may sack a creature. If you do, you get a creature with mana value X or less from those cards where X is 1 plus the sacrificed creature's mana value. So, for example, if you cheat a Quantum Riddler into play, I say cheat, but you can warp it into play for 2 mana, and then at the end of your turn, you can stack the triggers such that you resolve the ritual before the warp, and then you can get back the Solitude that way. There's no Ephemerates here, which might look strange with the Solitude, but we are playing 2 copies of Twining Twins, which is like an Ephemerate adjacent card. You can do the Swift Spiral for 2 mana to exile a non-token creature and then return it to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. So that's sort of your way to scam Solitude. We have Helga's Skittish Seer, say that 10 times fast. Bant colors for a 1/3. Whenever you play a creature spell with mana value 4 or greater, draw a card, gain a life, put a counter on Helga, and then you can make some mana with it. And what's nice about Helga is because you're playing with Riddler and Solitude, both of which you can cast for discounts, those would both trigger the Helga for cheap. So a lot to like here. Again, just take a look at the sideboard for posterity's sake, show you what's going on there, but really cool looking Omnath deck here from Spiromancer. So shout out to Spiromancer. And last but not least here for the Modern section from 1OR513N86 in 6th place. This is, I labeled it as Dimir Murktide or Dimir Midrange, but it's actually Esper Midrange. I didn't notice the white splash at first. Very light white splash for 1 pest control and 1 prismatic ending. But what I wanted to highlight here, again, the presence of Quantum Riddler. As you can see, this card is showing up in a lot of different places in Modern, and rightfully so. Most of the time, you're pairing it with Psychic Frog. Again, as I mentioned earlier, you can dump your hand with the Frog. The Riddler stays in play during combat because when you warp it, it doesn't get exiled until the end step. So you have it in play during combat after you've dumped your hand when you're attacking with the Frog. So that's kind of cool. drawing extra cards with Tamiyo. Tamiyo plus Riddler seems like a really cool idea, where if you can empty your hand, Riddler gets you an extra card to flip Tamiyo. We have the standard threats of Orcish Bowmaster, Subtlety, Psychic Frog, and then a card you maybe haven't been used to in Modern before, in Kaido, Bane of Nightmares. Very powerful card with stuff like Tamiyo and Orcish Bowmasters, just a cheap flyer or a card that you actively want to put back into your hand with Kaido. So that's kind of cool. And then some removals, some interactions, some cantrips like Preordain, good removal like Thoughtseize, Prismatic Ending, Fatal Push, Spell Snare, Force of Negation. These cards are sort of staples at this point. And then looking at the sideboard, just kind of wanted to highlight that. You can see what's going on there, just some various sideboard cards. So yeah, cool looking, different take on the sort of Psychic Frog mid-range style deck. So, and that's going to do it for Modern. So let us go ahead and transition over to Pioneer. And here's what Pioneer looks like. So over the past couple of weeks, I have been noticing a downtick in mono red mice. There was a point where it was 33%. The next week it was 25. The week after, which was last week, it was 20. And now, for the first time in what feels like years since we've been covering Pioneer, mono red mice is not the most played deck of the weekend. That title goes to Rakdos Demons. Now, it is still in second place at 12.5%, so maybe there's some evolution in the metagame going on, or more likely maybe people are just bored of mono red. But in any case, here is what Pioneer looks like, and it doesn't look too bad. Orzhov Monument still kind of hanging in there, 5.6. Azorius Control, Boros Hammer, Angels, those are roughly about the same. Mono White Humans and Esper Legends took a huge dip, as you can see towards the bottom left. Azorius Spirits, Lotus Field, things of that nature. Is it Phoenix? We started to see a pretty big decline over the past couple of weeks, and now it's skyrocketed back up from 2.5 to 9.4. So, I mean, Treasure Cruise, last time I checked, still a pretty good card. And then the other one that I want to mention here is Mono Black Midrange. Essentially, if you look at last week's chart, non-existent to 10.6%. So a lot of those decks are, I think the majority of them, maybe like 90% of them, are demons. I don't have it labeled as Mono Black Demons because some are playing demons, some are not. But if you wanted to mix in Mono Black Demons with Rakdos Demons, Unholy Annex decks as a core, I would say probably like 24%. So, that is pretty big as well. And then Esper Pixie, that was a list that does look very, very similar to the prior standard list. But, this town ain't big enough, and Hopeless Nightmare are legal in Pioneer, not in standard. So a little bit of an uptick there. That's mostly where the list does well. A lot of players copy paste it, and then there's 10 of them in the next challenge. That's kind of what happened there. But yeah, Pioneer looks pretty good. And let's see, we're going to take a look and see if we can find some spicy deck lists in these top 32s. And the first deck we are going to take a look at here from the one, the only CrusherBot BG. If you've played any Modern Hammer Time over the course of the last 4 years, ever since this deck started to pop up in Modern, you might be familiar with CrusherBot, and CrusherBot has been working on some Pioneer Hammer Time lists as well. And this one is quite a bit different than the ones they've been playing before. So 14th place here for CrusherBot. The core of this deck and the concept is still the same. You have Colossus Hammer, you have Cori-steel Cutter, you have Leyline Axe. I think this has been a feature of a lot of CrusherBot's lists. And that's pretty much the only thing that's the same, I guess. The ways that we are using to equip are a little bit different. So you'll notice that all of our creatures are dwarves. Toolcraft Exemplar, Giat, or Giat, King of the Dwarves, Magda Brazen Outlaw, and Brunor Battlehammer. So the ways that we have to equip, I will mention Brunor here is a 4-mana 5/3. It says each creature you control gets +2/+0 for each equipment, and then you can pay 0 rather than pay the equip cost of the first equip ability you activate each turn. So that's one of them. Now the reason all of our creatures are dwarves is because of Armed and Armored. This is 2 mana instant. It says vehicles you control become artifact creatures. That one's not super relevant. Choose a dwarf you control, attach any number of equipment you control to it. So if you have two Colossus Hammers in play and a single dwarf, whether it be any one of these cheap ones or even the Battle Hammer itself, then you can put both hammers onto the dwarf at instant speed, which is pretty cool, I'm not going to lie. The other new addition here is Tezzeret Cruel Captain. Really love this one as the tutor target, or the ways to tutor Colossus Hammer. Previously, people were playing Kellen, the Fey-Blooded, to be able to search up Colossus Hammer, but the really nice thing about Tezzeret is it is slightly less mana efficient at tutoring Hammer, 3 versus 2 in the case of Kellen the Adventure, but you just get a giant threat into play. There are certainly games where you just play Tezzeret, make a bunch of artifacts with something like Magda, because this just makes treasures to have Tezzeret's loyalty go up and up and up. And if you need to in a pinch, it can search out a Colossus Hammer. So really cool looking list here from CrusherBot, and CrusherBot continues to impress with these Hammer Time decks, so keep on keeping on. The next deck I want to take a look at is from Chicotech in 5th place. So did make a top 8 with this deck list. This is Rakdos Sacrifice, but maybe not Rakdos Sacrifice that you're used to. When I say the words Rakdos and Sacrifice, you probably associate that with Mayhem Devil, but there's no Mayhem Devils here. The curve stops at 2, which I can also really appreciate. What's going on here is we're building around weapons manufacturing. So whenever you have a non-token artifact enter, you can get a munitions. So ways that we have to sacrifice munitions are Oni Cult Anvil. So this one's very powerful because you get to sacrifice the munitions and create 1/1s along the way. You have Legion Extruder that can also sacrifice to make 3/3s. You have Deadly Dispute, you have Shrapnel Blast, so a whole bunch of ways to sacrifice munitions. And then on top of that, you're just a Cori-steel cutter deck because your curve is super low anyways. You're playing a pile of 1-drops like Clockwork, Fatal Push, Experimental Synthesizer, Research Desk, so on and so forth. So you get to be like a good aggressive cutter deck, but also play into the long game with weapons manufacturing and Anvil, while also providing a ton of burn like direct damage with Shrapnel Blast and the munitions. So really cool looking deck list here from Chicotech. There's the sideboard for you just for posterity's sake if you want to give that a try, and would highly recommend. This list looks like an absolute banger. Be Still My Beating Heart. X-File in 5th place. A big shout out to X-File. This is, can we call this Boomer Jund? I mean, it has Fatal Push, Thoughtseize, and Tarmogoyf? No, not quite. So X-File has decided to play this really interesting looking deck list. Now, on the surface, it looks like just a deck with Jund good cards. Blood Tithe Harvester, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, Graveyard Trespasser, Shieldred, again, aforementioned Fatal Push and Thoughtseize. But there's a really, really cool interaction here. So, Demonic Bargain. So this is 2 and a black sorcery. Exile the top 13 cards of your library, then tutor. So, now you see where this is going. You exile 13 cards, guess what you're going to tutor up? A 13/14 Cosmogoyf. So that's kind of the idea where you just exile a bunch of cards, search up the Cosmogoyf. If you already have the Cosmogoyf, you can just use the bargain to search up Temur Battle Rage to one-shot your opponent with the Cosmogoyf, even through blockers. You have stuff like Analyze the Pollen that you can exile a bunch of cards from your graveyard to go find a Cosmogoyf. Graveyard Trespasser can also exile cards from the graveyard. So really, really innovative take on this sort of like black-red or black-green mid-range deck. And I love everything about this deck. It just looks so freaking cool. So huge shout out to X-File for this deck list. And yeah, another one I would highly recommend. But that's going to do it for Pioneer. Let us go take a look at VV Block Constructed, also known as Standard. Okay, now I will say, in terms of the metagame share of Is It Cauldron, you look at last week 25%, this week 28%. That is technically down from 2 weeks ago when it was 33, but I mean, look at this, just like, look at this graph, right? Look at this graph. 5 decks, Cauldron, Dimir, Mono Red, Is It Prowess, and Azorius Control, those 5 decks take up 75% of the metagame. I mean, even just Cauldron and Dimir alone are already more than 50%. But don't let the graph fool you, because this is still a 1-deck format. I know a lot of people will tell you that Dimir midrange, they'll go on and on about Dimir midrange having a good matchup against Cauldron. Dimir players, we need to have an intervention. Your Cauldron matchup is not as good as you think it is. So, yeah, I mean, with the Spotlight Series in Orlando coming up this week, I would not be surprised if the metagame was 50% or more Cauldron. To be honest with you, I think 100% of the players in the room should play Cauldron. Obviously, that's not how it's gonna break down, because card availability issues and people being stubborn. But I myself have joined the dark side. I'll be playing Cauldron in Orlando. I'm not happy about it, but it is what it is. But yeah, Dimir midrange, roughly about this little bit of an uptick there from 19 to 26. It did take down 3 challenges, so maybe there's something they figured out. Mono Red Dragons, a little bit down from last week. Is it Prowess? Little down from last week. Azorius Control, the exact same. And then really everything else is just so small that it's not much worth talking about. Boros Mice uptick did take down 1 challenge this weekend, so if you're into the aggressive mice sort of style, and you're a little bit sad that Heartfire Hero and Monstrous Rage got banned, maybe try out this new mice deck. It's pretty cool. It's got the Whisker Veil Forerunner, 4 copies of those, so there might be something there. But not a lot else to talk about. However, we did find some pretty interesting deck lists in these top 32s. Let's take a look at them. The first deck we are going to take a look at here from Volti in 28th place, so maybe not the best performance, but this deck did look really, really cool on paper. So the idea is you, as we saw in Pioneer, Weapons Manufacturing, very powerful card if you have enough cheap artifacts. Now, this deck doesn't have a ton of cheap artifacts. A lot of them are 2 mana, like Cryogen Relic, ETB or leave the battlefield, draw a card. Instant Ramen, ETB, draw a card. Legion Extruder, ETB, kill a thing. But you may have realized that all of these have enter the battlefield triggers. What's good with enter the battlefield triggers, you might ask? Well, turns out Pixie and Sunpearl Kirin are. And there's a really cool thing where Sunpearl Kirin can also return a munitions token, because Sunpearl Kirin says return a other non-land permanent if it was a token, draw a card. So you can go Kirin, pick up a munitions, deal 2 to something, ideally killing a creature, and also drawing a card in the process. Now, what this all leads to, now, if you might remember, when Hopeless Nightmare was legal, there was a version of the Pixie deck that was playing Temporary Lockdown and Hopeless Nightmare. And the whole goal of the deck was to just loop Kirin, Pixie, Lockdown, Nightmare, and do that. Like Kirin, pick up my Lockdown, unlock the Nightmare, dome you for 2, replay the Lockdown, Nightmare underneath, play the Kirin, yada, yada, yada. And you can sort of do that with Pinnacle Starcage, where Starcage can exile a bunch of artifacts. The Weapons Manufacturing gets to stay in play, right? And then what you can do is you can go Kirin or Pixie, pick up the Starcage, get all of them back, trigger Manufacturing a bunch, and then ideally you have just replay the Starcage. And what's nice about that is that Starcage kills all the munitions token, which will deal your opponent a whole bunch of damage. So a really cool approach on this sort of like Weapons Manufacturing deck, including the Pixie Kirin plus Pinnacle Starcage package. I love that angle of the deck, and I think maybe this is something worth trying. I'm not sure about the No Moralize and the stock ups in the main, but I really do love the concept of this deck. So big shout out to Volti. Next up, I wanted to highlight this mono red deck from Manjay Yui in 4th place. This is not the only appearance of this version of mono red. I believe, and somebody can correct me in the comment section if I'm wrong, I believe this did well at a Japanese tournament. It either won or something along those lines, did like top 8 or did well. And that's where it sort of like started to make the rounds. I saw it posted on Twitter, and then I saw a couple of these lists online on Magic Online. Basically, the concept is you take the mono red deck, right, that has a low curve, Burnout Astronaut and Hired Claw. A lot of these cards you would maybe associate with mono red. The big difference here is, if you'll notice, they're playing 4 copies of Razorkin Needlehead in the main deck. This is RR for a 2/2, has first strike during your turn, and whenever an opponent draws a card, it deals 1 damage to them. So The idea is that you are quote unquote pre-boarded against Cauldron because every single time they cast a Tursa, they take 2. They cast Winter Knight, they take 3. They cast FOMO, they take 1. If they have a Riddler in play, maybe they're taking more than that because the Riddler is drawing more cards. Obviously, you would probably imagine the blue-red deck is really good at killing a 2-mana 2/2. Now, game 1, their interaction, most blue-red Cauldron lists have 3 Floodmoth, 3 Abrade, so maybe they're not as well equipped to answer it in a game 1 situation. Post-board, they have a lot more answers, but, you know, even as a 2-mana 2/2, like, it still gets in, even in the matchups where you wouldn't think it's good, like other non-Cauldron decks, it still gets in a couple of chip damage, so maybe it's not as bad as people think it is. Similar to, like, when the Cutter deck was everywhere and people were playing main deck Magebane, even in matchups where you wouldn't think Magebane is great, it still does some things, and that's similar to what Needlehead is offering you. And then just normal red cards like Nemesis, Sunspine, Burst Lightning, a couple of main deck Fiery Annihilations, because this can exile Vivi, can also kill Tursa after it gets 2 counters with Prof, same thing with Steamcore Scholar, so that's kind of the idea of playing that card. Scorching Shot, Old Bolt, Soulstone Village, so usual mono red stuff, just wanted to highlight these Needleheads as a new main deck technology against Cauldron, maybe. Next up from Bauer in 25th place, we have some Kona of the Gruul variety. Now, the first place that I saw this deck list, I believe it was Belovo, who either top-8'd or got 9th or 10th in a challenge, and then I saw that list got copied a couple of times, and it's been making the rounds. This is, I believe, that exact same list. Now, Kona, as you may, have seen previously in other versions of decks playing this card, 4/3, that beginning of your second main phase, if it's tapped, you can put any permanent from your hand onto the battlefield. Very powerful with the station lands, because these allow you to just tap the Kona. Also very powerful with Wagon, because Wagon has the crew ability, where you can tap the Kona to crew the Wagon, and then in your second main phase, it's, right there for you. You have big things like Galta, Ureni, Summon Bahamut, Valgavoth, Terror Eater. Those are your one-ofs, and then you have 4 copies of Vaultborn Tyrant. Now, a lot of these decks are playing white for Sariema, or they're playing black for reanimation spells and Cynical Loner, and this deck just decided to splash red for good removal, Scorching Dragonfire, and 4 main deck Abrades, which I like because Abrade can kill Agatha Soul Cauldron. So, if there's ever been a time to main deck Abrade, it's now. And then the rest of this deck is just some Elves, Esper Origins to help find your combo pieces. There is some... Actually, hold on a second. I think this may have... Okay, hold on. This may have actually been copied the entire 75. So, some of these cards are not in the main deck. Rex Sage, the Surox, the Seed Ship Impact. So, yeah, there was a bit of an issue importing the deck list, so just keep that in mind. Some of these are not in the main deck, but you get the idea, right? Smuggler's Surprise, Kona, big stuff, and then basically just using the Kona shell and splashing red for Dragonfire and Abrade instead of the other options. So, good looking list here from Bauer. And we are going to end this video on a high note. Timbits, who I believe got 32nd place in a challenge, so I just want to preface this by saying 32nd place is not the best record. They probably didn't win a lot of matches, but Timbits is an individual after my own heart. They have 4 copies of Hidetsugu's Second Right. Should you put this card in your deck list? The answer is almost undoubtedly no, but it is extremely based, and we love Timbits. If you've made it all the way to the end of this video, can we get a W Timbits in the comment section down below? With all of that said, that is going to do it for another episode of Watching the Meta. I really hope you guys enjoyed this week. Thank you again for watching, and until next week, adios.